Hello, welcome people. My name is Josh, and welcome back to another episode of Voices by Care by Train. We've got our co-host Sarah Hall,
Hello.
and today that's joining us is Ben Payne. He's the Director of Clinical Services at Fairleigh Healthcare, an organisation that is known for providing specialist complex care for adults with high dependency needs. So Ben, how are you? You well?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's good to meet you both again.
It's lovely. It's lovely to have you here. So Ben, I wanted to start with the beginning, and it's good to hear a little bit about, your own journey in terms of like how you got to the position that you are in. So could we start there?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, yeah, I started humble beginnings as a physiotherapist. So I trained at Bournemouth University. Obviously, getting into the industry, my enthusiasm for sport was certainly there, and then I sort of got my first job in the NHS. Actually, prior to that, I worked as a carer for a couple of years, so that gave me real exposure into care. Certainly helps me in the position that I'm in now. And then from there, just worked my way through both the NHS and private industries, and gradually working through the side of management, going to the dark side, as some people would say. And yeah, here I am today, basically. And it's been a really interesting journey from my point of view. Being a physio by background, allied health professionals, there are a few in the industry that are in sort of senior C-suite or management positions, but there's also a lot of nurses, and as you can appreciate, our model is very nursing heavy. And with that, through my clinical experience, certainly when I worked with complex ventilation, critical care environments as a physio, which not a lot of people know about. Typically people would say, oh, physios work with knees and sports injuries, and they get people up and moving. Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of other aspects in the acute settings that physios really, really help with as part of the multidisciplinary team. And actually, it's a lot more clinical than some people would think. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's absolutely amazing. You are so. There was two things I wanted to touch on. One was you said humble beginnings. Yeah, just in your demeanor, the way you, I'll say the dialogue that you give is most certainly do give off a very humble vibe. And the other thing I wanted to say, Ben, was just in relations to like physiotherapists. Yeah, like when I do hear about physiotherapists, I usually like instantly what comes to mind is, okay, cool. You see a footballer that's down on the pitch, and then, you see, the medical team running out to, the player that's on the field. Would you say that boils down to like limited education, the fact that people don't know too much about, your line of work?
Yeah, I think that's certainly one component. I think coming back to the humble beginnings, I think that's to do with your background as well. Actually, I had a very interesting upbringing. I think that shapes a lot of us. I lived in lots of different countries because, for want of a better phrase, I was a military brat. My family were in the military. We moved internationally. I went to 12 different schools growing up. That shapes you as an individual. It certainly makes you think on your feet and have to ingrained in different communities, different cultures, and that's certainly an aspect which I had a lot of interest in, as you can appreciate, physio wise. But yeah, coming back to physio, I think you're right that as a profession, but it's like a lot of other professions. There's the stereotypes, isn't there? Like you said with football, I'm a huge Arsenal fan as well, I have to say, and yeah, that's anyone's dream when you go into that industry of just working with those teams. I had I was fortunate enough to do a bit of work with Bournemouth Football Club, but there's it's like occupational therapists. People just think they deal with equipment and among other things, but actually there's so much more to that. Why speech and language therapists, dietitians, nurses even, for sure they have a hell of a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. But there's so many people within the care sector. We always forget about those people in the support services, HR in some aspects, learning and development in some aspects, the housekeeping, maintenance, kitchen teams. It is really a team effort. Any outstanding service that I've been a part of, I've been really fortunate in my career. I've got a good track record of working in outstanding and good CQC services. And it's interesting because there's a lot of common denominators with it, and it's not just the cherry on top, as I always sort of speak to the teams about. That's important, but it's sort of underneath it. It's always that stripping back to basics, who does what. And I think the other thing to touch upon is, I mentioned my experience earlier. There's a lot of other people out there with very similar experiences, but also not. Some organisations with the greatest respect, are run by finance and business people. Then don't have clinical backgrounds. They don't understand the clinical importance and may talk about it, but actually knowing it, having done it, having lived it is important, and it certainly grounds. And a lesson I was taught from a young age was don't get your A's mixed up, which stands for ambition and ability. And I think it's really important that we ground ourselves with that. And we all have to remind ourselves with things like that sometimes.
100%. Would you say you having experience working in kind of the care and role yourself has shaped you as a leader and sort of your approach to leadership?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Ultimately, every day is a learning day. I'm not someone that tries to be a closed book. We can learn from everyone. It doesn't matter what role you do. Ultimately, the shaping me as a leader. I mean, I mentioned my sort of, again, I use the word humble beginnings, but I did travel internationally. I grew up internationally. I had to move every year, 2 years of my life. That shapes you in some respects as a leader, because I mean, I'll give you a really basic example. When you're a young man, child, it doesn't matter what age you are really. If you're having to go to a different school every 2 years or a different college, you have to learn very key skills. Skill number one, communication, verbally, non-verbally. Confidence is absolutely key, and you have to be adaptable. So I think that as a leader is really important, and I think that's a really important point from my sort of self-reflection, is that. And then obviously people that shape you, mentors that you have, people that you pick things up from, and people that you work with, different environments. If I take my time at Ascot Rehabilitation, which was an international rehab hospital, which was I was a hospital director of the operations for the group at the time, and we worked with a lot of international embassy patients. Their first language wasn't English, for example. So, what do you do from a leadership point of view? Yes, you should, and not just out of courtesy, but out of knowledge. Let's pick up some of the language. Let's make sure we're becoming personable as well. I think as a leader, I do think the word dynamic is easy to say, but it's something that I constantly am trying to achieve. Even under our current chief executive, Andrew Norman, who's a nurse by background, we're two clinical board members. Ultimately, yeah, it is about dynamic leadership. It's around, that emotion. That word emotional intelligence is important, and some people have it, some people don't. Picking up sometimes, we all have bad days, but it's trying to pick up, actually, is this person having a bad day? Is it the right time to approach this or not? Or it's all about those sort of things as well. It is really a life skill, not just a professional skill. And I think it's leading from the front. Even in my role now, I have done, things like night inspections. And I know that sounds quite trivial, but, it'd be interesting to ask how many nursing home hospital leaders actually do, midnight inspections, or have actually seen the workings of the nighttime shift. How many people pop into a barbecue on the weekend. And I don't do it all the time, but I have done it on a number of occasions, and as have my colleagues. And I think that, speaking about leadership, coming back to that original discussion we were just talking about, I think that's important. And being hands-on. I mean, honestly, we're a small family-run business still, working exclusively with the NHS for extremely complex patients. In the grand scheme of things, we're not the likes of a Barchester or a Cara Healthcare or a Active Care Group. We're a lot more unique than that. We're a lot smaller than that, but it's very much holding to those values. It's really easy to lose those values as well, I think, on a scale. So that's kind of a roundabout way how I'd explain it in layman's terms, rather than getting too technical.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I know you mentioned there that obviously you guys are a smaller employer when it comes to care. Is that due to it being quite complex care, or, as you said, obviously it's family run, it's fairly new?
Yeah, good question. I mean, so my kind of 2 pence worth on it is that, we're family run. We're owned by, a family, have done for 26 years. We celebrated our 25th year anniversary last year, so 26 years this year. And it's a really interesting journey with Fairleigh Healthcare Group as we are now. Started off at Fairleigh House in 1999, in between 2012 to 2016, Highfield House, and then Woodstown House opened, just around that tough period in 2021, so just around COVID. We have 130 beds, so roughly around 453 employees, I'm told. We sponsor a reasonable number of sponsored workers, I think sort of just over 50. And I think the reason we're that scale is it's also that patient safety, it's that quality, and it's a really niche area. Our USP is tracheostomy and non-invasive ventilation. We've done that for over 15 years. And yes, we look after individuals with complex neurological conditions, neuromuscular conditions, as well as, some other complex injuries and conditions. But ultimately, that's really niche in itself. We're also the first in the UK, I'm told, by King's College London NHS Hospital to have a static dialysis, hemodialysis machine in a nursing home setting. So not hospital, but nursing home setting. And I think that feeds into what people have done prior to me, people in my role prior to me, as well as, what I've tried to continue to do under the direction of our strategies, which is, let's continue to be unique, diversify, and it feeds into the NHS 10-year plan. Providers like us, whether it's the independent sector or not, we need to continue to work collaboratively. It's not just to support economics. You only have to listen to the latest, government budget to know the pressure that continues to be on all sorts of healthcare providers.
Yeah.
But, also it's around looking after people. First and foremost, the value of a family-run organisation, I think, is a lot easier to sort of foster compared to the scale of a corporate level. It's not that it's not possible. I think it's just, as I say, a lot harder at scale. So, yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why. Coming back to that, I think that's the key thing. We're family-run. It's basically a one-man band as such on that level. It's not a number of investor groups and so on.
Now, Ben, you said you absolutely love that take, by the way. And you spoke about leading from the front, right? And I can clearly feel it. I can feel it. Even though you're saying words, I can feel it. When I do think about, of course, the type of industry, I sometimes think it can be kind of like chaotic. And now, because you lead from the front and you have such like a calm demeanor, how do you balance delivering, intensive clinical care with creating like a calm, homely environment for residents?
Yeah, that is a good one. I mean, we just constantly come up with different scenarios. Even this week, I give lots of different scenarios that just crop up that you don't even think about, and that's across the centres. Because I try to be hands-on, but also, we do have really experienced managers, people that absolutely foster the same values as I believe I do and the organisation does. But I think cool, calm, collected is so easy to say in really clinical environments. I think it really fosters down to people's experience, life experience, but also working experience, professional experience. Training and development is key because that all feeds into one. Where did we start from? What training did we have? There's always that discussion in recruitment, certainly from our point of view, who's worked in the NHS before, because it really embeds that clinical experience and even non-clinical. Again, it's not all just about the clinical. We have a lot of other support staff and as do many other groups. But yeah, I think that's really important. I also think it's the leaders and managers. What is that culture? If you see a manager that's quite clinically competent and confident, is that going to foster through the environment? Yeah, probably. I think we could all sort of agree that. And are they relatable? I also think, that element of adrenaline in certain situations is key. And I think it doesn't matter what sort of personality people have, everyone's going to bring something different to the table. We have a number of staff that, when you first meet them, you think how am I going to phrase this? They might be miserable. It's just their persona. They're not. They're very caring people. It's just them. There's nothing wrong with that. You can't change anyone completely. Well, I think we have to embrace all of those equality, diversity and inclusion aspects, and we should do. It's the same with languages as well. We work in particularly our centres. We're based in and around London. It's the most diverse probably place in the whole of the UK easily, and I think those things feed into the question you're asking quite importantly. And although I'm doing a sidestep there, I think it's important to mention.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I know you mentioned training and development is a key element. And from our previous conversations, I remember you saying that you do a lot of learning development internally. Can you just touch on kind of what you guys do and how that makes you guys different from other care providers?
Yeah, so I'll give you a basis of the structure on that from our point of view. Again, when I mention and joke around, a pokey family business, that's kind of how I often joke with people about, Fairleigh Healthcare Group, because we're a small group. But ultimately, as we've expanded from 1 to 3, 130 beds, 450 odd employees, of that, obviously, at least 60-70% of those individuals, if not more, are the clinical teams, because that's the huge base of what we offer. So in terms of our learning development structure, how it's set up, obviously operationally, clinical services wise, there's a lot of interface with me and my teams, and obviously you've got the governance, the assure part of our framework. We've got the human resources and people, which our learning development currently sits under, which I work very collaboratively with a lady called Leslie Kozowski, who's our HR and people director, and we also have a learning development manager. So the way we're structured in sort of a hierarchical approach, just to define it a little bit easier, we have HR and people linked with the operations clinical services, because that drives what we need to train and develop and where we're going. Part of that is then we have a learning development manager who sort of, for want of a better phrase, oversees the strategic, the policies, the processes, the apprenticeships we're looking at, and I'll touch on that hopefully later. It's a really exciting development for us that we're in the new year, we should be pushing the button on. And then we have sort of like 3 streams then. We have our nurse trainers. We feel really passionate that we should have nurses that are training our nurses and that are also training our carers, because there's quite a few delegated responsibilities in our model. And I'll come on to that. We have care skills trainers. So we offer the care skills and a certificate, which again is a qualification for care staff that are either entry level or have had experience, where they can come out with something tangible, not just saying that they've got 4 or 5 years experience, but they've been trained in, the basics and advanced elements of important parts of care. And then we also have a learn development coordinator, which is a relatively new role in the grand scheme of things for the last probably 18 months. That was a really integral part of that model, because like any provider, you have to diversify, you have to change. Match training schools are really, really important on a basic level from a regulatory CQC point of view for healthcare providers. And we decided to go for a bit of a more hybrid managed training model. So we decided to go a bit more online with certain trainings, and then we still maintain face-to-face sessions. So that's kind of a bit of an overview of our structure. Within that, what they do is it's a vast amount. I'm kind of probably downplaying it. There's never enough time in these scenarios, but annual competency review, key. It's fine to be confident, but are you competent? Have you maintained those updates? My favorite phrase is when staff members often come to you and say, well, I've done it for 15 years. But that's great, and that is hugely important. But things change, practices change, you get into bad habits. That's why training is constant. We do 3 p.m. sessions every day on managed training topics, and have done for a number of years. We have our online trainings. We have the fire drills night and day that we do throughout the year, but also we do the drills obviously weekly to ingrain those standards. We have a magnitude of other things, from things that crop up. Let's talk about dialysis. That's a recent thing that's come up, and we have joined forces with King's College Hospital, and they've been very, very supportive in that. They're providing the expertise, but our staff are going to learn from that. So you're getting also that external input. We have a lot of external professionals we work with, from dietetics to speech and language therapists that are in the service throughout the week. And we have GPs that come in and out. We work with specialist NHS consultants and tertiary centres like Lane Fox Unit in the Brompton, who are ventilation specialists, and we're very fortunate. For a number of years they've come into our services to do their rounds periodically throughout the year, and we have them at the end of the phone. And that of course is a key component of keeping our patients safe and the continuity. So all of these things form a part of training, both informally, formally, TOC. We recently have taken an assisted cardiac device patient who requires tracheostomy and ventilation, but it's the assisted cardiac device at Woodstown House this week actually that is really unique, because that requires very advanced dressings, monitoring the monitor, troubleshooting it. And again, 2 weeks prior to admission, we needed the teams to do competency-based training. So it all feeds in, and you'll see how these things just crop up dynamically if we get a referral through. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
That's incredible. And I feel like a lot of this development, right, it helps, it just ties back into what you said, like through knowledge, right, you become more competent. And obviously with competence, well, I would say through knowledge, you get a lot more confident. And then with confidence, you grow that element of, competence as well. So I feel like that ties in very smoothly. But would you say this has helped you retain the right people within the company?
Yeah. I mean, I'm led to believe from last figures in a board meeting, we're 8% attrition. I think the average is 30%, so that's pretty good. I think that sort of speaks for itself. But I think the nature of healthcare, some people are looking at different avenues, the cost of living. So you're always going to get various reasons why people leave, but I think because of our clinical pathway and development model, certainly on a carer and probably nursing level, we have really good development pathways. If someone, Ben, for example, joins Fairleigh Healthcare Group, 1 year as a carer, my first 6 months is really embedding me as a carer. It's doing the care skills certificate with the care skills team. It's doing the localized induction, obviously the corporate induction, for want of a better phrase. And then actually after 6 months, if I'm demonstrating all those good skills and embedding them, I get the opportunity to progress not just in pay, but in level, in title to a healthcare assistant. And that gives me competency in PEG, so enteral feeding management under the nurse's supervision, as well as tracheostomy, airway management, things like suctioning, things like basic care needs, troubleshooting, but also escalating, because it is ultimately a delegated responsibility from the nurse on shift. And then from there, 6 months on, even sooner, depending on my background, because as you appreciate, we have a number of overseas carers that are nurses, from places like the Philippines, India, Ghana, and then they can progress maybe quicker than some others that don't have those background qualifications to a senior healthcare assistant, which is really the ventilation competency and some other unique competencies, but particularly it's the ventilation. But again, you get progression in pay. And we all know progression typically helps with retention, but it's empowering people in roles as well. And I think that's always been a really big selling point for us. I think something really interesting about us as well, I was really baffled, I've got to be honest, when I joined the group, just because it was the first group I've ever heard has done this. But we pay for our staff's breaks as well as a handover. And the reason I bring that up is because I think it feeds into retention, because a lot of health and social care, nursing home, complex care, even hospitals, they pay for 11 hours. So our rate is spread across 12.25 hours in a lot of cases, which actually is often higher prorated if you did it across 11 hours. A lot of people don't really understand that aspect. I think it's a really hard one to explain, because it's kind of like, why would you pay for a break? But we do it for a number of reasons. Anyone that's practically worked in the healthcare sector knows that sometimes staff are entitled to their breaks, but sometimes they might not get their full break, and that's because they're putting the patients first, they're putting the residents first, people first. And so actually paying them, they're also on site, and they're getting a form of a reward just through being paid. So I think that's quite an important point on that question, on the retention. I do think though, I'm talking lots of positive stuff, of course I am, but there are things we can work on. There's always things we can work on. It's embedding that learning culture and where we go with it, which, we've been having a lot of discussions about. So you were to ask me from a development point of view and a learning point of view, what could we do more of? Well, we could certainly be way more proactive with our managers and future leaders and supervision and that succession planning, in my opinion.
Mm.
And I think that may be looking at external opportunities with certain courses. Certainly we've done Resound training before in the past. I think there's an element that wasn't as successful as it could have been. I think, there's the balance, isn't there, of theory and practical aspects of being a leader and a manager. And I think the key difference from my point of view on the management front, it's around people management. Certainly when you're a manager and supervisor, it comes to those, it's not just those things when your member of staff says, oh, I'm pregnant, right, how do I deal with that? Or versus I'm really sick and absent and I have been for the last 3 months and this is why. It's not just around saying, right, well, you've been off constantly, why? It's sort of listening to the individual why, what can we do to accommodate? If we can accommodate, does that meet the business needs? Linking in with human resources or external support networks. And it's also the patients, the relatives. That's probably one of the hardest parts of a supervisor and manager's job in a clinical setting. And how do you navigate that? Some people naturally do it, but we all have situations where we maybe could handle it better, and that's not just around reflection, it can be around experience, it also can be around learning and having that. So I think that's certainly an area we could work on as a group. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. I think it just demonstrates that we continually want to strive for outstanding, and we've got things to work on. And anyone that says they don't have things to work on, it's just porcupines. So yeah, and other things as well. I think I've touched upon our carer development pathway, which I think is a really nice journey to explain, and it feeds into our really unique specialist complex care model. But also, where else can we go? Nurses. We obviously, it's a good avenue that we can explore at our Fairleigh House facility, that our nurses become dialysis competent in the future, providing our initial case that we've taken on works well, and then case 2 and case 3, and as it expands potentially from there, that's an upskilling avenue. It's quite a niche area. There's areas relating to complex behaviours, which within complex care, there is a lot of injuries where individuals sustain quite a lot of complex behaviours, not just mental health, but it's how people navigate those aspects, because there is a lot of not just de-escalation techniques that people can be given tools to learn. Yeah, a load of other things.
Yeah. No, I think it's good kind of hear self-reflecting without even being given the nudge to do so. I think you're very open in the fact that, I also agree that every day is a school day, and you mentioned earlier that policies change all the time. New things come out, new practices, and as you said about the home taking in new patients and things like that, there's always something that we can be learning. And I know you mentioned about external training, so you do a lot of internal L&D around things that you need to be training the staff on. But in our conversation off camera, we had a bit of a chat about how external apprenticeships could maybe benefit, or what benefit they could bring to the staff and the team. And I think I heard you mention something about the new year, so it'd be good to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so in all honesty, we've been discussing the last 2 years around apprenticeships and apprenticeships in our environment, and how can we best accommodate that both operationally because of the placement requirements and also the learning aspect. And so next year, we're actively looking at embedding, and we should be commencing our first cohort within 2026. Whether that's the start or end is to be confirmed, but we're looking at 2 per centre, so 6 cohort of nursing apprenticeships. And I think that's hugely exciting. I mean, we've had... we talked about retention earlier, but we've got a number of, and dare I say it, but I am going to say it, we've got some carers that will be fantastic nurses. They will be. I think it's really important to emphasise, not just because of all their care experience, but because of their values, because of their knowledge and their desire to want to care for people well. And with that, has the opportunity for sort of qualification, a career progression. Come? No, probably not, because there's cost of living, the practicalities of, middle-age with a young family, or not even middle-age, young family, them going off to university, the cost of that. And so I think apprenticeships are really, really the forefront. I don't even know why they've ever been lost in care personally, because they were a big thing years ago. Nurses did diplomas years ago. It was a hands-on apprenticeship. And it is a hands-on vocational job. There's a lot of theory to it. It's, of course, a lot of technological advancements, but I think that's going to be really exciting. I think the model we're adopting will be with the Open University. A few reasons from our point of view, because there's greater flexibility with learning. On the job and off the job. The model will support our organisation with maintaining placements more in-house, because we have 3 different centres. Each centre has some elements of unique opportunities which can tick certain elements of the placements off, but there will be external placement requirements as well. And, working closely with, King's College London Hospital, guys, St Thomas's Hospital, these big teaching hospitals, as well as Epsom and St Helier hospitals for one of our locations. And then you've got Croydon University, which used to be Mayday Hospital. I think there's a lot of collaboration there where they would be open to supporting some of our placements as well. I think it's testament to how good our staff is. And I'll tell you a story which happens quite a lot as well in terms of development, which is why I think we could produce really good future nurses as well. So when an individual requires hospitalisation because they're acutely unwell, they've reached our ceiling where we can meet their needs, that does happen. They need an acute hospital. When they go in, it's really interesting when a hospital says, can your staff stay with us because they're really good at what they do? But frankly, you've got to look after the individual because they're needing your expertise. But isn't that interesting when you have acute NHS trusts actually saying, oh, can your staff stay? Oh, no, we're not commissioned for that. And, that's where NHS, but it's a compliment, I think, in a lot of ways. It's both a compliment and an interesting request in some respects, but I think that we take it certainly as a compliment. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree that is it's a great compliment. And I think it feeds into what you're saying about, you guys could produce some great nursing staff. And it's really interesting your kind of view on that, because I do speak to other smaller care homes, not as complex as you guys, but I think leading back to what you said about apprenticeships kind of being lost, I think it comes down to understanding that apprenticeships aren't always for starting out in the role. It's great for career progression, for, embedding further knowledge, skills and behaviours. That's what apprenticeships are great for. And it's also having the understanding that, as you said, having a bit more flexibility about apprenticeships and being able to do it, when it works for your staff, not having to go to a college or a training centre, which is very much how things used to be done. There's so many training providers now, like ourselves, who are more flexible in the approach to delivery. And I think we're in the 21st century now, we've got to be, so staff can continue delivering the care that they do to the residents while also being able to learn and progress in their career. So yeah, it's great to hear kind of your guys' next step with degree apprenticeships. I know there's so much talk about them right now. So yeah, I kind of went on a tangent there and I've completely forgot the question that I was going to ask. Let me have a look at my notes.
No, sorry. It's all right. It's all right. I have a question. Ben, your storytelling is very impressive. I wanted to hear like another use case during your career. You've worked within the army. I'm pretty sure you've heard of David Goggins, who's going to carry the boats. Yes or no? Yeah.
I think I've heard, yeah.
You've heard of him, right? But like during your career, it would be great to hear like a use case where, a scenario has been not the best. And then, you guys as a company have, completely turned the scenario around and a success story.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the most recent one, and it's 12 months nearly of my life. So I'll go through it, obviously, in summary. So you've got, let's paint the picture here. And this is in summary, obviously, of course, without going into specifically, but people can look at our website for the sort of journey in a way. So basically, you have a gentleman, living his life with his wife and a family, has quite a severe stroke. Also has end-stage renal failure, and then goes into hospital. From there, requires tracheostomy ventilation because of, suppressed and affected lung function, among a number of other things. But on top of that, with the end-stage renal failure, they also need dialysis. So that individual then goes to intensive care because they need it. Of course they need it. They become quite unstable. There's a lot of blood pressure complications, among a load of other things. I'm simplifying it. But that individual's then in hospital for nearly 4 years. 4 years, man with a family before, living a relatively normal life, is then in an acute, very high acute critical care environment. So at this point, they've been in there 3 years, not 4 years, and they approach a provider such as us, among others, of course. That's procurement process of commissioners in integrated care boards, the ICBs, and the family are just keen to get out. They want to live a life as they can. Who wants to be in a critical care environment for all that period? But what are the barriers? Well, the barriers isn't the tracheostomy and ventilation, as many people would probably think. It's not even the individual. They're not complex in nature. Very, very, very pleasant family and person. Unfortunately, they're a Chelsea fan, though. That was the only thing from my point of view, being an Arsenal fan. And because I get involved in a lot of our admissions and referrals, so basically what was the barrier? It was dialysis. It was dialysis. So the scenario was, can you take this individual? Yes, we've assessed, we followed our process, and okay, great. Right, they need dialysis twice a week. Okay. And then you've got the polite disputes between teams, both within the NHS, the ICB, the funders basically, and then us, the independent provider that works exclusively with NHS. So what was the challenge and the barrier? Well, the barrier was the fact that no one had ever explored having dialysis within the centre, but that wasn't even considered at this point. There was no solution-focused thinking on it. And I think it was just because we tried that before, it never worked, it couldn't happen. So the avenue was, let's spend 1.5 million of taxpayers' money to do a double nurse escort twice a week and an ambulance paramedic crew to ship this person 15-20 minutes each way down the road twice a week to have their dialysis, on top of, the expense of coming to a specialist provider like us, on top of taking them in and out twice a week. So anyway, the journey goes on. And then myself and the team kind of just took a step back and thought, okay, we are, why can't we think of something different here? 1.5 million of taxpayers' money. I mean, if that's not waste, I don't know. And of course, the ICB refused it, and I don't disagree with them. Huge expense for one individual in a time where budget cuts were happening. Everyone knows around NHS England and ICBs having to disband and shrink. 18,000, I think, redundancies are happening in the next few months. And so anyway, we came in, myself in particular, and I said, let's explore, let's do a site survey. Where can a dialysis machine be fitted? Because there's plumbing involved, there's electrics involved, there's space involved. And then how can that be costed, etc.? Because that would stop the 1.5 million in journey costs, basically, and quite enhanced staff costs. And anyway, cut a long story short, we move on. Those surveys were done. Installation then happened. The ICB agreed. Of course, it saved them at least 1.2 million, if not a little bit more, a year from that original fee. And the installation happened. The training was done, reassessments were done, and the patient was admitted. And that's a really fast forwarded aspect of that journey. I think this is a recent, timely success story in something that was a huge problem, but we put the patient first, which is part of our core value. Everyone else did eventually rally together. And I think actually really the interesting point, regardless of how long we've been going for, 26 years, 15, 16 years of trachea ventilation, what really interested me is, and what I learned a lot from it, is how even a hospital that we've worked with for a very long time, they had a lot of professionals that didn't actually realize it was possible, and that a nursing home specialised and looked after patients like this, which I found really interesting just because of our history. But maybe that comes back to us being a family-run business. We don't put loads of stuff into marketing like a lot of these big other providers do, and we've always had the referrals based on reputation, and we're not massive. We're a lot bigger now, but we're 130 beds, but before we were 45 to then sort of 80 beds, and then we went to 130. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting story. I mean, there's a load of other things, I could go on all day talking to you both around scenarios in my nearly 3 years here. And that's, beyond that, Andrew Norman, our chief exec, who's been involved in the group for 14 years, but chief executive for 4 years. He has some really interesting stories. But yeah, that's kind of probably one that I think really demonstrates the journey. And again, feed into a lot of what we've been discussing around training, competency, opportunities, diversification in clinical model, championing the 10-year NHS plan, because it does feed into that as far as I'd be concerned reading it. And I think the openness to wanting fundamentally to support, and you get so invested in these people that you've never even met before, and then suddenly they're calling you on the phone regularly. This individual's wife was calling me just asking for advice and support, and that's understandable if they're not getting it as well.
Yeah. No, it's good to hear sort of the involvement you guys had with that case, and I'm sure you have many cases like that go under the radar, people just don't know about. And I think it leads back in sort of what I said earlier about the knowledge in the sector about how training can benefit the staff. I think a lot of the time when you speak to care homes, they're overworked, they're understaffed, they don't often have time for the training that is necessary. So I think a good question is kind of what value can and do apprenticeships add, or could they add, other than obviously the degree apprenticeships that you're looking at, to the staff, as well as making sure that they're still providing the level of care that make you guys kind of get these great referrals and go by word of mouth?
Yeah, I mean, other than, of course, being able to offer recruitment-wise, retention-wise, that progression ladder, that further progression ladder, that's for sure point number one. I think also fostering the learning environment, that will be enhanced, because you're going to have at least 6 cohort. Then obviously in the future, that just ramps up and develops of people that are actively learning nursing-led tasks and knowledge. So I think that by default, that will help operationally with staffing, because if you've got trainee nurses that are on the floor, that's also going to help with patient safety. That'll help with clinical governance, because there's a lot of things within clinical governance which we've been discussing about today. And also culture mentality is important, I think, with that as well. Of course, you're going to go into other things like, well, how do you select the individuals? You have to go through a recruitment process. People apply for the apprenticeships, and it's got to be, fair, transparent, and evidence-based. But yeah, I think apprenticeships, what else would they give you? I mean, I guess if you speak to the finance department, I'm sure there's apprenticeship levies. So, there's so many other things as well. Of course, everyone would know about stuff like that. So I think they're the key things. They'll bring their challenges as well, though. I discussed earlier around the time out when they need to do external placements. How do you staffing wise, the impact on that, even if it's 6 to 12 week period, it's still a chunky period. Retention, although it could be positive, what happens if someone says, right, actually, I'm going to jump ship. I've seen a job in, and we've seen this, we've seen a job, I've got a job in Manchester. The cost of living's, half the price of it is in London. I'm going to get, a salary of a nurse up there, and I can also buy a house up there. That's the real world we live in.
And I think that feeds in, challenges, the budget's just being released. There's so much chatter right now, especially around sponsorships, what's going to happen with that in the next couple of years. And I know you mentioned earlier that, is it right, you have around 50 staff members who are on sponsorships? Yes,
the last data our HR director Leslie gave was 56. So we have 24, I believe, nurses that we sponsor. We've done, certainly Andrew and Leslie, probably just prior to my time, have done 2 overseas recruitments as part of and we've worked with partners like Insignia, who are really, really well known in certainly in the recruitment sphere from my knowledge, and Kristin and her team, and they're great. I know Andrew certainly champions them. And yeah, we have then the rest is kind of either nursing background sponsorships under certain SOC codes or non. And I think it's the non-qualified healthcare sponsorships that are going to be really tight for providers. And it's not just what they're being set from an hourly rate. That's probably the biggest pinch on providers, because arguably, is it fair to give someone £3 more doing the same role as someone else just because they need sponsorship? I think that's the hardest thing that's been set in recent budgets, I think, on that front. We sponsor a number for a small provider. I think we do, but we are seeing less and less of that. I think that's going to be halved in the next year to 2 years. And I think that's testament to our really good recruitment team, our clinical pathways, what we offer, and what we're continuing to strive for, which is being living wage employer, not just above the minimum. But as I said earlier, arguably we're not far from that if you prorate that across 11 hours being paid, as opposed to what we pay, which is 12 hours and plus for a lot of grades the 15-minute handover.
No, I love that. And as we're heading into the new year, and you've given us insight into some of the plans for next year. But what are you excited for next year, and what are some of the plans for the company as well?
Yeah, I mean, always in our strategy, and especially where Woodstown House has been growing in a really deliberate, phased approach, because it was our newest centre. They're now 90% occupancy, so we have residents, patients now pretty much fully in that building. I think for us, it's all around that consolidation and that element of maturity. It's just really focusing on, certainly from a clinical operational governance point of view, it's really consolidating on what lessons we're learning, increasing the data which we get within the organisation, and what drives the decisions through data. As I said, as a family-run business, the concept what corporate organizations bring is a lot of that data decisions, but we need to, not just from all sorts of data, retention, recruitment, how many safeguarding incidents we've had and what themes have come across, what are our audit scores, what will be done about that, what lessons have we learned, how do we communicate with staff and other sort of stakeholders in business terms and wider, and also those development pieces around the cardiac side of things, the apprenticeship side of things, as well as our services. We're looking to do some modest refurbishments, and I think that's important because the buildings people live in, it's fundamentally their homes, although they're very clinical environments. And we did a huge change not that long ago, which was really driven by integrated care boards needing to save money. So what we used to do, I'm just going into this because I think it's important, and it's constant topic of conversation, which we're going to need to continue to look at. Staffing levels. Staff cost money. They cost money. And we need to reason, we need to risk assess, we need to risk manage how many staff we have and why an individual either needs one person with them constantly for monitoring purposes, and why they do or don't. And I think it's an exciting and also a challenge, but I think it's something we're going to have to continue to look at. I think a lot of providers are. And again, it's just because of the climate, but I think we just need to embrace it and be really, really focused on why or why not we do something. But yeah, I think there's lots of challenges as well as, exciting times ahead. I think there's lots of things which we'll continue to push on, both clinically, development wise, staffing wise, and I think we're in a really positive place as a group. How many providers in the UK can honestly say we don't use agency? And I mean that as a positive thing, because in our model, in who we look after, not having agency by default, in my view, increases patient safety. Because again, that training development we have in-house, we do use external components as well. Of course we do. For example, we did fire extinguisher training from external fire safety, and that's bells and braces arguably, but when you train people on those things, it just feeds into the outstanding aspect of things we do. So yeah, I think that's in summary. Lots of things, lots more things, and who knows what else will come our way. I think sometimes it's opportunistic. I've talked about the dialysis a number of times during our chat, and I've discussed around external cardiac monitoring devices as well that's recently come to the table. Again, opportunities, what can we do about it? We've had a number of 7 cases which aren't under the Mental Health Act because we're not registered for that, but are individuals that have been in hospital that need certain environments, and we've taken a very small cohort, want of a better phrase, to support the pressures on the NHS to do that. Again, that's just an opportunity they came across, and we've sort of been open to saying, well, let's try it, let's see what do we need support wise. So yeah
2026, you've got a handful of things to do, Ben.
Yeah.
But no, it's beautiful, the fact that you got a lot on. It's truly exceptional. I'm pretty confident myself and the team at Train are going to be keep up to date with what you're doing as well. Make sure we're going to stay connected via LinkedIn and emails, and continue discussions as well. But I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Your insights were pretty complex, but I loved it, and especially that development part, the development pathway, and the future of workforce. You've truly shown your value during this conversation. So thank you so much, Ben. And yeah, guys, for everyone that has been listening, this has been another episode of Voices by Care by Train. Sarah Hall, our co-host, thank you so much. And yeah, guys, before I do wrap up, Ben, for people that want to know more about yourselves, where can we direct them to go?
Right, yeah, sure. So, of course, we have LinkedIn page, Fairleigh Healthcare Group. We have a Facebook page, Fairleigh Healthcare Group. And, of course, we have our website, www.fairleighhealthcare.com.
Stuff. I'll be certain to link that in the description below. But Ben, thank you so much again. Sarah, thank you so much again. And guys, we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye.